The day my son laughed at me in front of strangers, I was holding a coffee pot. That's the detail I always come back to. Not the words he said, not the way his wife Brianna pressed her lips together like she was trying not to smile, not the sound of forks going quiet at nearby tables as people stopped pretending not to listen. Just the coffee pot, heavy in my right hand, still warm. I remember thinking, don't drop it, Clara. Whatever else happens right now, don't you drop that pot. I am 68 years old. I have buried a husband, raised 2 children, taught 3rd grade for 35 years in the Memphis public school system, and survived things I don't talk about in polite company. I have stood in front of classrooms full of 8-year-olds who needed me to be the steadiest thing in their world, and I was steady. Every single time, for every single one of them. But standing there to my green Rosie's Diner uniform, the one that rode up on my left shoulder no matter how many times I adjusted it, with my son Darnell looking at me like I was something unfortunate he'd stepped around on the sidewalk, I had to reach back through 68 years of living just to keep my chin up. "Well, Mama," he said, his voice carrying clear across the restaurant, "I see you found somewhere that suits you." It was not a compliment. I should have seen it coming. The Lord knows the signs were there long before that Tuesday afternoon. But before I tell you about Darnell, before I tell you about what he took from me, and the quiet old man at the corner table who turned out to be something no one in that diner could have imagined, I need to start at the beginning. Because this story does not begin with betrayal. It begins with love. The real kind. The kind that costs you something and keeps on costing. My name is Clara Johnson, and I was not born into anything easy. I grew up in a 2-bedroom house on Castalia Street in South Memphis. My mother, my grandmother, my 4 brothers and sisters, and whatever cousin needed a place to sleep that month. My father worked the railroads until his back gave out when I was 11, and after that he worked whatever he could find. We were not poor in the way that makes people feel sorry for you. We were poor in the quiet way, the way where you learn early that nothing comes free and nothing good stays without tending. My mother had 3 rules she repeated so often I can still hear her voice saying them. Go to church, get your education, and don't you ever let anybody make you feel like you don't belong in the room. I followed all 3. I graduated from Melrose High School in 1974, the first in my family to finish. I got a 2-year scholarship to Memphis State and worked the breakfast shift at a Howard Johnson's to cover the rest. I became a teacher because I believed, I truly, deeply believed, that a good teacher could change the direction of a child's life, and for 35 years, I tried to prove that every single day. I met Harold Johnson at a church picnic in the summer of 1979. He was standing by the potato salad looking like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to be there, and something about that made me walk over and introduce myself. Harold was an electrician, a careful, methodical man who measured twice and cut once in everything he did, including marriage. We dated for 2 years. We got engaged on a Tuesday in November because Harold said he didn't believe in waiting for special occasions to do important things. We were married in June of 1981 at First Baptist Church on Mississippi Boulevard. My grandmother made the cake. My mother cried through the whole ceremony. Harold's hands shook when he put the ring on my finger, a simple gold band with a small diamond that he'd saved for over 18 months. He told me later he'd driven past the jewelry store window every week for a year and a half, making sure it was still there. We built a life the way people built things back then. Slowly, carefully, with their own hands. Harold and I bought our house on Prescott Street in 1986, the year Darnell turned 6. It was a 3-bedroom brick house with a covered porch and a yard deep enough for a real garden. Harold fixed everything himself. The plumbing, the roof, the kitchen cabinets that I never did think were quite level, but never said so. I planted hosta along the front walk and roses along the back fence, and one summer Harold surprised me with a row of sunflowers along the south side of the house because he said he wanted me to see something bright from the kitchen window every morning. Those sunflowers, Lord, I love those sunflowers. We raised 2 children in that house. Darnell was our firstborn, bright, determined, with Harold's serious eyes, and my mother's quick tongue. Simone came 4 years later, softer in temperament but sharp as a tack underneath. I worked days at Riverside Elementary. Harold worked long hours on commercial jobs across the county. We scraped and saved and did without things we wanted so our children could have things they needed. I want to be specific about this, because it matters to what comes later. When Darnell was a junior in high school, he told us he wanted to be a lawyer. Harold and I sat at that kitchen table for 2 hours that night after the kids were in bed, going over numbers on a yellow legal pad. We knew what college would cost. We knew what law school would cost after that. We knew what we had and what we didn't have. Harold said, "We find a way." And we did. We cashed in a small savings bond my mother had left me. I took on tutoring 3 nights a week. Harold picked up weekend jobs, rewiring old houses in Midtown, doing electrical work for a contractor friend. Darnell got a partial academic scholarship to University of Tennessee, and we covered the rest. When law school came, the numbers were harder. Darnell's first year, we came up short by $4,200. I remember the exact amount because of what I did to cover it. Harold had given me a gold ring for our 10th anniversary. Not expensive by most standards, but it had a pattern of tiny interlocking circles that he said represented every year we'd keep adding to our life together. I had worn it every day for 12 years. I took it to a jewelry buyer on Summer Avenue and came home with $4,500 in an envelope. I never told Harold what I'd done. He found out 3 months later when he noticed I wasn't wearing it. He cried. Harold Johnson, the most composed man I have ever known, sat down at that kitchen table and cried. Then he pulled himself together and said, "When Darnell graduates, I'm going to buy you a better one." He never got the chance. But that's not this part of the story. The day Darnell graduated from the University of Memphis School of Law, he found me in the crowd on the lawn and pushed through all those robes and mortarboards until he reached me. He was 27 years old and 6'1", and he bent down and held me like he was 8 years old again, and he said into my hair, "Everything I am, Mama, every single bit of it, is because of you." I still have the photograph from that day. For a long time I carried it in my wallet. Harold died in March of 2019. Heart attack, 62 years old. He was in the backyard on a Saturday morning, doing something with the fence gate that had been sticking, and then he wasn't doing anything at all. The paramedics said it was fast. I have to believe that. I have to believe he didn't have time to be afraid. I will not spend much time on the grief because the grief is still there, and if I pull on that thread, I will unravel completely, and that is not what this story is about. What I will tell you is this. Harold left me the house, paid off, fully ours. He left me a life insurance policy worth $85,000. He left me a retirement account from his union that I rolled into savings, which brought my total to right around $160,000. Not a fortune, but a foundation. The kind Harold spent 40 years building with careful hands and a yellow legal pad and a willingness to do without. 6 months after Harold's funeral, Darnell and Brianna started coming around more. At first it felt like comfort. My son checking on his mother. Brianna bringing food. She made a sweet potato pie the second week that I ate half of in one sitting and wasn't even ashamed. They would sit in the living room and talk, and for a little while the house felt less like a place where someone used to live. But when I look back now, and I have had a great deal of time to look back, I can see the shape of what was really happening. It started with small comments. Brianna walking through the kitchen saying, "Mama Clara, have you thought about what you might do with this house? This neighborhood has gotten so desirable." Not a question exactly, more like a door being nudged open. Darnell offering to help me set up online banking. "Mama, older people get scammed all the time. You need to have the right protections in place." I thanked him. I let him sit at my computer for 40 minutes. I didn't know enough about what he was doing to know what questions to ask. Simone calling from California. She'd moved out there in 2015 for a job in healthcare administration and never really come back. And agreeing with everything Darnell suggested before I'd even finished explaining what he'd proposed. Like she already knew. Like she'd already had a different conversation that I wasn't part of. And then there was the afternoon I came home from church and found Darnell in my bedroom, standing at the dresser with the top drawer open. He had my home deed in his hands. He was taking a picture of it with his phone. "Darnell?" He looked up calm as anything. "Hey, Mama. I'm digitizing all your important documents, so everything's backed up. You don't want to lose track of this stuff." I stood in that doorway and looked at my son, and something in my stomach went sideways. Just for a second. Just a small, quiet shifting of something I didn't want to name. "You could have asked me," I said. "Didn't want to bother you." He smiled, slid the phone in his pocket, put the deed back in the drawer. "All done anyway." I told myself it was love. I told myself Darnell was a good son who worried about his mother, I told myself that the feeling in my stomach was grief, making me suspicious of people who were only trying to help. I was 67 years old. I was 7 months out from burying my husband, and my son put a stack of papers on my kitchen table one Sunday afternoon in August of 2021 and told me they were trust documents. It's an estate planning tool, Mama. Standard stuff. Protects your assets from probate, keeps everything in the family, makes sure Isaiah and any future grandchildren are taken care of properly. Isaiah was 8, Darnell and Brianna's son, my grandchild, a round-faced, serious little boy who liked dinosaurs and chapter books and sitting in my lap while I read to him even though he was getting too big for it. I would have done anything for that child. Should I have my own lawyer look at it? I asked. Darnell laughed. Not unkindly, just easily, the way you laugh at a question that doesn't need asking. Mama, I am a lawyer. That's literally my job. I wrote these documents. I would never put anything in here that wasn't completely in your best interest. He sat down across from me and reached over and covered my hand with his. I just want to make sure you're protected, he said. That's all this is. I'm your son. I'm taking care of you. I picked up the pen. The documents were 43 pages long. I read the first 6 and skimmed the rest. There were terms I didn't fully understand. Revocable trust, power of attorney, beneficial interest transfer. But Darnell was sitting right there, and he was a lawyer, and he was my son. And Harold had been gone for almost 2 years, and I was so tired of making every decision alone. I signed on the lines he pointed to. That was the last normal thing I did for a very long time. October in Memphis is the kindest month. The heat finally breaks, and the light comes in at an angle that makes everything look the way it did when you were young. The Bradford pears turn orange along the streets, and in the mornings there's enough chill in the air to make you glad for a sweater. That October I was still living in my house on Prescott Street. The sunflowers had finished for the year, but the stalks were still standing, and I kept meaning to cut them back, and kept finding reasons to leave them a little longer. On a Wednesday afternoon in the second week of October, Darnell dropped Isaiah off to spend the afternoon with me. This was our regular thing. Wednesdays after school, 2 hours of grandmother time before Darnell picked him up on his way home from the office. I lived for those Wednesdays. Isaiah came through the door with his backpack half unzipped and a permission slip he needed signed, and a burning need to tell me everything that had happened at school that day, in precise chronological order, starting from the bus ride. I signed the permission slip. I made us both a cup of hot chocolate, real cocoa powder, the way my mother had made it. We settled onto the couch under the quilt Harold's mother had made us for our wedding, and Isaiah pulled Where the Wild Things Are off the shelf. It was the 17th time we had read that book together. I know because Isaiah had started keeping count in the front cover, in his careful 3rd grade printing, small tally marks in pencil. He climbed into my lap, all 53 pounds of him, entirely too big and completely unconcerned about that fact, and I held the book so we could both see, and we read it the way we always did, with Isaiah doing the voices for the wild things, and me doing the voice for Max. Outside the window, the last of the sunflowers caught the late afternoon light. That was the last ordinary afternoon I would ever have in that house. 3 days later, Darnell called. "Mama," he said, "we need to talk about the house." November came cold that year. Darnell and Brianna arrived on a Sunday, dressed like they were going somewhere after, which I noticed because they almost never dressed up to come see me. Brianna had on a cream-colored blouse I hadn't seen before. Darnell was in his good charcoal suit. They sat on my couch and they told me they were worried about me. "Living alone in a 3-bedroom house, Mama, it's just too much," Darnell said. "The stairs, the yard, the old wiring, it's not safe." "I've lived in this house for 35 years, I said. "I know every creak in every floorboard." "That's exactly the point," Brianna said, her voice warm and carefully kind. "You've been here so long you might not notice when things have gotten beyond what one person can manage." They told me about a place they'd found, an assisted living community in Germantown. Clean, well-reviewed, organized activities, on-site medical staff. "It's really lovely, Mama Clara. I think you'd make friends quickly." I told them no. Clearly and without ambiguity, no. They didn't argue. They smiled and nodded, and Brianna refilled my coffee, and they left an hour later, and I thought that was the end of it. 3 weeks later, a letter came from Regions Bank. It was addressed to Darnell, care of my address. I almost set it aside for him. Then I looked at the account number printed on the outside. That was my account number. I called the bank from my kitchen phone, standing at the counter where Harold and I had stood for 35 years doing ordinary things. The woman on the phone was patient. She put me on hold twice. When she came back the second time, her voice had changed. Careful, the way people get when they're about to say something they don't want to say. Mrs. Johnson, this account was placed under third-party management authority in September. The primary account holder of record is listed as Darnell Johnson. I stood very still. Can you say that again, please? I said. She said it again. I thanked her. I hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a long time looking at the sunflower stalks in the yard, dry and pale against the November sky. Then I called Darnell. He answered on the second ring, easy and warm, the way he always answered my calls. And when I told him what the bank had said, he didn't miss a beat. Mama, that's the trust structure we set up. That's how it works. The trustee has management authority over the accounts. That's me, because I'm protecting your assets. It doesn't mean the money isn't yours. Darnell, I didn't understand I was signing over my bank account. You signed a revocable trust document. That's standard estate planning. Mama, I promise you I can explain every page of that agreement. Nothing has changed. Your money is safe. His voice was steady, patient, reasonable, and I wanted to believe him. God help me, I wanted to believe him, because the alternative was something I could not hold in my mind without the whole world tilting sideways. So I said, okay, we'll talk about it when you come Sunday. Absolutely, Mama. Sunday. Love you. I hung up and looked at the letter in my hand, and I noticed something I had not let myself notice during the phone call. When Darnell said your money is safe, he paused just before the word safe. Just a half second. Just long enough to choose the word. Harold used to rub his wedding ring when he was managing what he said. A small, unconscious gesture, his thumb moving over the gold band while his voice stayed calm. I had never noticed Darnell doing it until that moment on the phone, when I suddenly heard the shape of the silence, and knew. I put the letter in my kitchen drawer and did not sleep that night. That was the moment I should have acted. The moment I almost looked at the truth and looked away instead. I was still my son's mother. And mothers, God forgive us, are the last ones to stop believing. Dorothy Mae Williams had worked the breakfast and lunch shift at Rosie's Diner for going on 22 years, which meant she had seen everything worth seeing in a 40-block radius of that corner on Summer Avenue. She knew which regulars were lonely and which ones just looked lonely. She knew which couples were happy and which ones were performing happiness. She could tell in the first 30 seconds whether a new customer was going to tip well or make her chase them to the door. What Dorothy had not seen before was a retired school teacher showing up at 68 years old asking about open positions. I came in on a Monday morning in February of 2022. I had my resume in a manila folder. 35 years of teaching experience, a commendation from the Memphis City Schools superintendent, references from 3 different principals. I don't know why I brought the folder. There is no diner in America that asks a waitress for a resume. I think I brought it because it was the only document I still had that proved I had once been somebody who mattered. Dorothy looked at me across the counter for a long moment. You ever waited tables before, honey? No, I said. But I managed a classroom of 28 third graders for 35 years. I believe I can manage a section. Dorothy smiled. Not a pitying smile, but a real one, the kind that reaches the eyes. You can start Wednesday, she said. 5:30 to 3. Wear comfortable shoes, the good ones, not the pretty ones. I showed up Wednesday in my best New Balance sneakers and spent 8 hours learning that my feet had never in their life been truly tired before. Dorothy showed me how to carry 3 plates on one arm, how to remember 6 orders without writing them down, how to refill coffee so smoothly a customer doesn't notice until the cup is already full, how to smile at a man who snaps his fingers at you and not let anything show on your face. You're going to be fine, she told me at the end of that first shift when I was sitting in the break room with my shoes off and my eyes closed. Takes a body about 3 weeks to stop protesting. After that, it just becomes what you do. I needed it to become what I did, because by February of 2022, I had nothing else. Here is what had happened between that November phone call and that February morning. After I didn't sleep that night, I spent 2 days trying to read back through the trust documents I had signed. 43 pages of language I didn't have the legal training to fully parse. I called Darnell twice. Both times he walked me through his explanations, patient, calm, always with just enough technical terminology to make me feel like the confusion was mine. On the third day, I drove to see Reverend Aldridge at First Baptist. Reverend Aldridge had been the pastor at First Baptist for 16 years. He was a small, precise man with round glasses and the kind of stillness that made you feel like whatever you were carrying, he had room for it. He had presided over Harold's funeral. He had sat with me in the weeks after when I could barely get out of bed. I sat in his office and told him what was happening. He listened without interrupting, which was one of his great gifts. When I finished, he said, "Clara, I want you to talk to someone before you do anything else. A lawyer. Someone who has nothing to do with Darnell." "Darnell is a lawyer," I said. "Yes," Reverend Aldridge said carefully. "He is." He gave me the name of a legal aid organization that worked with seniors, a non-profit on Poplar Avenue that provided free consultations. He wrote the number on a notepad in his careful handwriting and folded it and put it in my hand. I sat in the parking lot of First Baptist for 15 minutes before I called. The lawyer's name was Patricia. She was young, couldn't have been more than 35, with natural hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the focused energy of someone who had chosen her work for reasons that had nothing to do with money. She agreed to see me the following Tuesday. I brought the trust documents, all 43 pages. Patricia read for a long time. The office was quiet. A ceiling fan turned slowly overhead. I sat in the chair across from her desk and looked at my hands in my lap and tried not to let myself understand what I was beginning to understand. She looked up. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, and her voice was gentle in the way that doctors' voices get gentle right before they say something that will change your life. "Did you know when you signed this document that you were transferring ownership of your property?" The room was very still. "Darnell said it was estate planning," I said. "He said it protected my assets." Patricia set down the document and folded her hands on top of it. "Your house transferred to a trust of which your son is the sole trustee and primary beneficiary. He has full legal authority to sell the property, refinance it, or transfer it without your consent. The language here," she turned to a page and pointed, "effectively removes your right of occupancy upon trustee determination of incapacity. That determination can be made unilaterally." I heard the words. I understood them individually. It took several seconds for them to assemble themselves into meaning. "He can put me out of my house," I said. "Yes. And the money." Patricia turned to another section. "The savings account transfer is documented here. As of October, the balance was $162,000. Current balance," she had pulled the records I'd authorized her to access, "is $89,000. I did the arithmetic without wanting to. $73,000, I said, "in 3 months. Mrs. Johnson, what you're describing has a legal name. It's called elder financial abuse, and in the state of Tennessee, it is a crime." I drove home from that office and sat in my car in the driveway for a long time, long enough for the afternoon to go dim around me, long enough for the neighbor's dog to bark and stop barking and bark again, long enough for the cold to work its way through my coat. Then I went inside and I called Simone. My daughter answered on the third ring with that particular voice she used when she knew she was about to have a hard conversation. Slightly too bright, slightly too quick. "Mama, I was just thinking about you. How are you doing?" "Simone," I said, "I need you to tell me the truth." Silence. "I need you to tell me what you knew and when you knew it." The silence went on for 8 seconds. I counted. When Simone spoke again, the brightness was gone. "Mama, Darnell said this was best for you. He said you were struggling with the finances since Daddy died, that you needed someone to manage things. He said," "How much, Simone?" Another silence. "He said it was part of the estate restructuring." "How much?" $40,000, she said. Her voice was barely there. "He said it was my portion of the inheritance, just early. He said you had agreed." I had not agreed. I had not been asked. "Mama, I'm sorry. I should have—" I hung up. I sat in my kitchen, Harold's kitchen, the kitchen where I had cooked 35 years of Sunday dinners and helped with homework and celebrated graduations and mourned losses. And I understood completely, for the first time, what had been done to me. Not by strangers, not by con artists or scammers preying on a vulnerable old woman. By my children. By the 2 people I had worked 3 jobs and sold my wedding ring and given the best decades of my life to raise into people I was proud of. I sat there until it was fully dark outside. I did not cry. I was not able to cry. The grief was too large for tears. It was the kind of thing that sits in your chest like a stone and simply waits. I want to tell you about the moment I almost didn't get back up. It was a Tuesday in January, 3 weeks before I started at Rosie's. I was living in a studio apartment on Lamar Avenue that cost $380 a month. The walls were thin enough to hear my neighbor's television. The heat came on in fits and starts and smelled like something burning each time. I had $61 in my personal checking account. I had half a bag of rice, a can of black beans, and 4 eggs. I had my pension from Memphis City Schools, $712 a month, which covered the rent with $332 left for everything else. That January, I lay awake in that apartment and thought about Harold. I thought about the way he used to make coffee on Sunday mornings, slowly, like it deserved his full attention. The way he sang off-key to the radio without knowing he was doing it. The way he looked at me at Darnell's graduation, when our son said what he said, and Harold caught my eye over Darnell's shoulder and gave me that small nod that meant, we did this, together. We did this. I thought about the sunflowers, whether anyone was tending them, or whether they'd been torn out to make way for something new. I thought about Isaiah, my 8-year-old grandchild who had sent me a text message 6 weeks earlier, his small thumbs working carefully on a borrowed phone, that said, "Grandma Clara, I miss you. Daddy said you moved. Are you okay?" I had not been able to answer that text for 3 days because I did not know how to answer it without lying, and I was not willing to lie to that child. On the 4th day, I typed back, "I'm okay, baby. I love you. You take good care of yourself." That was the moment. That text message on a Tuesday night in January. That was the moment I felt the bottom of what I was willing to accept. I lay in that thin-walled apartment and I thought about my mother's voice. Don't you ever let anybody make you feel like you don't belong in the room. And I thought about Harold's voice. We find a way. And I thought about Isaiah counting tally marks in the front of a book with a pencil, keeping track of something that mattered to him. And something in me, something that Darnell and Brianna and Simone and 3 months of loss had not been able to reach, straightened up. No, I thought. I will not let this be how my story ends. Not in this room, not like this. Not when that child still needs to see me standing. I called Reverend Aldridge in the morning. I told him I was ready to fight and I needed help. He gave me the number for a senior advocacy organization called Memphis Elder Justice Alliance. He also mentioned, with some significance, that he'd heard Rosie's Diner on Summer was looking for waitstaff. "They're good people," he said. "Dorothy Williams is there. You know Dorothy." I did know Dorothy. We'd been in the same Sunday school class for 11 years. I got my New Balance sneakers out of the closet, and I went. I noticed Walter on my 5th day at Rosie's. He arrived at exactly 11:20, before the lunch rush, which meant he always got his corner table without waiting. He was tall, or had been once. The height was still there in his frame, but it had the quality of something from long ago, like a building that settled slightly into its foundation. Silver hair, good posture despite a slight stoop, hands that trembled when he reached for his cup. He wore clean clothes that had seen better years. A gray cardigan with a small pull near the left pocket. Khaki trousers, ironed. Brown shoes that were polished but worn thin at the heels. He smelled faintly of good soap. He ordered the same thing every day. Coffee, black and white toast. $2.75. He counted out the money each time from a small leather coin purse, quarters and dimes, arranged in advance, which meant he had counted them out at home before he came. I recognized what that meant. You count out your money in advance when you are not certain you have enough, and you cannot afford the embarrassment of coming up short. On his 3rd day, I brought him an extra pat of butter without him asking. He looked up at me with gray eyes that were clear and sharp in a way that seemed slightly mismatched with the trembling hands and the careful quarters. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Butter's free," I said. "Besides, toast without enough butter is just punishment." Something moved in his face, quick, almost hidden, like the beginning of a real smile that he'd decided against at the last second. "Thank you," he said. His voice was educated, low, with the kind of diction that comes from either money or determination or both. "My name is Walter." "Clara," I said, and went back to my section. Over the days that followed, we accumulated conversation the way you accumulate anything good. Slowly, in small pieces, without quite planning it. A comment when I refilled his coffee. A question when my section was quiet. He told me he was 76, that he'd lived in Memphis most of his life, that his wife Eleanor had passed 18 months before. "I'm sorry," I said. "I lost my husband 3 years ago." He nodded. "Then you know." "I know," I said. He never asked me why I was waitressing at 68. He never asked why a woman with my bearing and my vocabulary was wearing a diner uniform and spending her days carrying plates. Whether that was tact or something else, I didn't know then. What I knew was that he ate slowly, like a man who had learned not to waste what he had. That he left $1 on a $2.75 check every single day, without fail. 36%, more than lawyers and businessmen left on $50 lunches. That he watched people with those 2 clear eyes in a way that was thorough without being unkind. And that when I had a break and sat for a moment in the back booth with a cup of coffee, and my feet were hurting, and my heart was hurting worse, he had a way of simply being quiet in the same direction as me that felt strangely like company. One Thursday, 3 weeks after I started, I was running behind. A table of 8 had come in 20 minutes before close of the lunch rush. Dorothy had a dentist appointment and left early, and I was covering her section too. I hadn't eaten anything since 6 in the morning. Walter's toast had gone cold on the pass because I hadn't been able to get to it. I brought it to him with a fresh cup of coffee and an apology. "Don't apologize," he said. "You're doing the work of 2 people. I had my own lunch. It's a bag in the break room, a peanut butter sandwich and an apple I'd packed before dawn. I hadn't had time to eat it, and the rush wasn't showing any signs of breaking. I looked at Walter's cold toast. I looked at his coin purse on the table. I thought about the $7 I had in my wallet and the 14 days until my next paycheck. I went to the break room and got my lunch bag and brought it out and set it on his table. "The kitchen's backed up," I said, which was not entirely untrue. "Take this. I'll get something later." Walter looked at the bag. He looked at me. Those clear gray eyes were doing something I couldn't quite read. "Clara," he said slowly, "are you giving me your lunch?" "It's a sandwich," I said. "It's not a sacrifice. Eat it before the bread gets stiff." He was quiet for a moment. "Why would you do that?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. I shrugged. I was tired and my feet hurt, and I didn't have a complicated answer. "Because you're hungry and I have food, and that's a simple kind of math," I said. "My mother taught me that." I went back to work. I did not see the way he watched me cross the room. I did not see him sit very still for a long time with his hands flat on the table, not trembling at all, looking at the paper bag like it contained something that required careful thought. I was too busy to notice. I should tell you, I had no idea what I had just done. No idea what that small, ordinary act of sharing a peanut butter sandwich was going to set in motion. No idea who was sitting at that corner table in the worn cardigan in the counted-out quarters. I was just a tired woman trying to get through a Tuesday. It was Dorothy who first said something on a rainy Friday morning in March, stirring her coffee in the break room before the breakfast rush. "Clara, did you see that thing in the commercial appeal about elder financial abuse? They had a whole feature. 3 families in Shelby County last year. Children taking parents' houses right out from under them using trust documents." She said it the way you say things when you've been turning them over and wondering whether to mention them, and then mentioning them sideways, aimed at no one in particular. I was tying my apron. I kept my eyes on the knot. "I saw something about that," I said. Dorothy put down her coffee cup. She looked at me the way she'd looked at me the morning I walked in with my manila folder. That direct, clear look that sees what it sees and doesn't dress it up. "How are things going with your son, Clara?" "Fine," I said. The word sat there between us, obvious in its dishonesty. Dorothy reached over and put her hand on top of mine. "Whenever you want to talk," she said. "I'm here." I nodded. I finished tying my apron. I went out to start my tables. But something had shifted. The way things shift when you've been avoiding a door and someone stands near it long enough that you start to think about opening it. That afternoon, I called the Memphis Elder Justice Alliance for the 2nd time and made a real appointment. Not a preliminary inquiry. A real appointment with documents, with a plan to understand what my options were and what it would take to pursue them. Patricia had been right. The case had merit. What Darnell had done had a name, and that name carried legal consequences. But pursuing it would require time, evidence, and resources I didn't yet have. "Building a case like this takes months," the advocate told me. "But we've seen it done. We've seen people get their homes back." I drove back to my apartment on Lamar Avenue. I sat at the small table by the window and I wrote down everything I remembered. Dates, conversations, the specific things Darnell had said when he put the papers in front of me, the exact words he used when I called the bank. I wrote for 2 hours. My handwriting was careful and even, the way it had been on 35 years of report cards and lesson plans and notes home to parents. I was building something, slowly, with what I had. Downstairs, through the floor, I could hear my neighbor's television laugh track. Outside the window, it had started to rain. I kept writing. 2 weeks after Dorothy's question in the break room, my son walked into Rosie's diner at 12:43 on a Tuesday afternoon. He had Brianna with him. They were dressed well, he in his gray suit, she in the cream blouse I'd seen before. They were laughing about something as they came through the door, the easy laugh of people who feel comfortable in whatever room they enter. I was at the coffee station refilling the carafe. My back was to the door. I heard the bell and turned, and there he was. For one full second, one long, suspended, foolish second, something lurched toward hope in my chest. He came. He found me. He's here to make it right. Darnell's eyes moved across the diner. They found me. His expression did not do what I had hoped. It did not soften. It did not show remorse or discomfort or the grace of a man who has been carrying guilt. It showed amusement. The slow, certain amusement of someone who has arrived at exactly the scene they expected. He said something low to Brianna. She looked over at me. She pressed her lips together in that careful way. And then Darnell walked across the diner toward me, his good shoes clicking against the linoleum, and I stood with that coffee pot warm in my hand, and I thought about my mother's voice, and Harold's voice, and Isaiah's careful pencil marks, and I held on to all of it as hard as I could. "Well, Mama," he said, the restaurant had gone quiet. The way restaurants go quiet when something real is happening in public, and everyone has the decency to stop pretending not to notice. "Darnell," I said, "I saw your car in the lot. Wasn't sure at first. Had to come in and look." He let his eyes travel over me. The uniform, the name tag, the coffee pot, the shoes Dorothy had told me to buy for function, not appearance. "I see you found somewhere that suits you." Not a compliment. "How are you?" I said. I don't know why I said it. 68 years of motherhood, maybe. The habit of the question is deeper than the pain. "Doing well, Mama. Really well." He looked around the diner with the expression of someone taking an inventory. The worn booths, the hand-lettered specials board, the smell of grease and coffee and decades. "This is—" He paused, and I could see him selecting. "This is quite a change from Prescott Street." "Yes," I said. "It is. Must be humbling." The word landed with its full weight. "After everything." Brianna had drifted to his side. She touched his arm lightly, and I could not tell if it was a restraint or an encouragement. "Darnell," I said carefully, "if you want to talk—" "I'm just saying hello, Mama." His voice was easy, reasonable. The voice he used in court, probably. The voice of a man who controls the frame of every room he enters. Can't a son say hello to his mother? He looked at me for a moment longer. Then something crossed his face. Something I hadn't expected. Not cruelty, exactly. Something worse. Satisfaction. The satisfaction of a man who has completed a transaction and found the numbers came out in his favor. "You look tired," he said. "You should make sure you're taking care of yourself." He turned to find a table. Brianna followed him without looking at me. I stood at the coffee station and I breathed. 1 breath, 2. I became aware that the whole restaurant was very still. And then from the corner, from the table by the window, where a man in a gray cardigan sat with his quarter-counted coffee and his white toast, I heard the sound of a chair being pushed back. Walter stood up. Walter moved slowly. That was the thing I remember most about that moment, how unhurried he was. No urgency, no drama. Just a man carefully pushing back his chair, placing his napkin on the table, and standing up with the deliberate economy of someone who has learned that speed is rarely the point. He crossed the diner toward us. His steps were measured. His hands, those always trembling hands, were completely still at his sides. Darnell had his back to Walter. He was scanning the room for an open table, still wearing that expression of easy satisfaction, still moving through the world the way he always moved through it, like the space was already his before he arrived. He didn't notice Walter until the old man stopped 2 feet behind him. "Excuse me," Walter said. Darnell turned. He looked down at Walter the way tall men sometimes look at shorter, older ones, A quick visual assessment that arrives at a conclusion before the other person has finished speaking. Yes? Not unkind. Not kind either. The voice of a man who is tolerating an interruption. I couldn't help overhearing, Walter said. This is a private family matter. Darnell's voice was patient, precise. I appreciate that, but it really doesn't— I know it is, Walter said. I won't take much of your time. Something in his tone made Darnell stop. Not the words, the tone underneath the words. The quality of a man who is not asking for permission to speak, and never was. The restaurant was completely quiet now. Not the polite quiet of people pretending not to listen. The real quiet of people who have stopped pretending entirely and are simply watching. Walter looked at Darnell with those gray eyes, clear and level and entirely without performance. I've been coming to this restaurant for 3 weeks, he said. Same table, same time, every day. And in those 3 weeks, the woman you just spoke to has refilled my coffee before I had to ask for it. She brought me extra butter when she knew I didn't have money to order more food. One afternoon when the kitchen was behind and she hadn't eaten anything since before dawn. He paused. She gave me her own lunch. Not a leftover. Not something she didn't want. Her lunch. The one she'd packed for herself at home that morning. Darnell glanced at me, then back at Walter. That's very nice, he said. She's always been generous, but I'm not sure what that has to do with— She did those things, Walter continued, as though Darnell hadn't spoken. While dealing with circumstances that would have made most people mean. She never complained. Not once. She treated me like a person on the days when I imagine it was very hard to remember that other people have problems too. He stopped. Let it sit. You came in here today and looked at your mother in that uniform, and you made a choice about what to say to her. In front of strangers. In her place of work. Darnell's jaw tightened. With respect, I don't know who you are, but you don't know anything about my family. No, Walter agreed pleasantly. I don't. He reached into the inside pocket of his cardigan. Not a cardigan pocket. The inside of it, which meant it wasn't a cardigan at all, but a very old, very soft sport coat that had been mistaken for one. He removed his phone. It was not the phone of a man who counted out quarters for toast. Platinum case, custom leather wrap, the kind of device that costs more than most people's car payments and is made for exactly 2 people in any given city. Brianna saw it first. I watched her eyes change. Walter pressed a single button, speed dial, the first position. He held the phone to his ear, and when someone answered, his voice shifted completely. Not louder, not harder, just different. The way a river looks the same on the surface until you realize how deep it is. Raymond, it's Walter. I need you to pull everything you can find on a Clara Johnson. Attorney, Memphis, Tennessee. Employment history, business affiliations, financial obligations, any pending matters. Yes. A pause. Priority 1. Thank you. He ended the call. He slipped the phone back into the inside pocket. He looked at Darnell one more time, and what was in his eyes then was not anger. Anger would have been easier. It was simply recognition. The look of a man who has spent a long life reading people and has just finished reading one. You should know, Walter said quietly, that the way you treat people who can't do anything for you is the most accurate thing about you. Everything else is just a story you tell. He turned, walked back to his table, sat down, picked up his coffee cup. His hands were trembling again. Darnell stood very still for a long moment. Something had moved behind his eyes. I could see it happening. The rapid recalibration, the sudden awareness that he had been in a room whose dimensions he had not correctly measured. He looked at me. Mom, he said. His voice was different, quieter. Who is that man? For the first time since he'd walked through that door, I felt something other than pain. I thought he was just a lonely old man who needed someone to talk to, I said. I'm starting to think I was wrong about that. Darnell looked back at Walter once more. Then he and Brianna left without eating. The bell above the door chimed behind them. Dorothy appeared at my elbow with a fresh pot of coffee and said nothing at all, which was exactly right. The call came to Darnell at 2:37 the next afternoon. I know the time because he called me at 2:53, and the panic in his voice had the specific quality of something very recent, the kind of fear that hasn't had time to construct itself into a position yet. Mama, just the one word, and in that one word, 68 years of knowing my son's voice, knowing every register of it from his first cry in a Memphis hospital to his closing arguments in a courtroom. I heard something I had not heard from him since he was 7 years old and had broken a neighbor's window with a baseball and didn't know how to tell Harold. He was frightened. "Darnell, I need to talk to you. I just got a call." He stopped, started again. "I got a call from a man named Raymond Holt. Do you know that name?" "No," I said, which was true. "He said he represents Walter Thompson. He said Walter Thompson has been made aware of another stop, of certain financial arrangements involving my mother's estate. He said Mr. Thompson wanted me to know that he was aware of the situation and was considering his options." I sat down at my kitchen table, my small table in my small apartment with its thin walls and its struggling heat. "Darnell," I said, "who is Walter Thompson?" The silence that followed told me he already knew. Had probably been on his phone since 2:38, the moment Raymond hung up, searching. "Thompson Capital Group," Darnell said. His voice was strange, flat and tight at the same time, like something trying not to break. "Mama, do you know who you've been having lunch with?" "A man who orders toast and coffee," I said. "A man whose wife died and whose children stopped calling. A man who reminds me of your father in certain ways, though I couldn't tell you exactly which ones. He's worth somewhere between $400 and $600 million, Darnell said. He owns Thompson Capital, commercial real estate, private equity, financial services. I could hear him working through something. He's been off the radar for 18 months. People in the industry thought he was sick. Or what? Or doing something like this." The apartment was quiet. "Mama," Darnell said, and now his voice had changed again. Softer, more careful, the voice he used when he was trying to find an angle. "Whatever he's told you about me, whatever he thinks he knows, he hasn't told me anything," I said. "Raymond Holt called you, not me." "But you know him. I've been bringing him coffee," I said. "That's what I do now, Darnell. I bring people coffee." A long pause. "What does he want?" Darnell asked. "I think you should ask him yourself," I said. "He comes in every morning, 11:20, corner table by the window." "Mama, I have to go," I said. "I have an early shift tomorrow." I hung up. I sat at that small table for a long time. Then I did something I had not done in many months. I got out a piece of paper and I wrote a letter to Isaiah. Not a text, a real letter, on paper, in my teacher's handwriting. I told him I was okay. I told him I loved him. I told him his grandmother was working on something important, and that when it was done I was going to take him somewhere special, just the two of us, and he could pick where. I sealed it and addressed it to Darnell's house. Whether it got to Isaiah or not was not something I could control, but the writing of it was mine. He was already at his table when I arrived the next morning. I had come in 45 minutes early. Dorothy raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. I set up my section, filled the sugar caddies, started the first pot of coffee, and then walked over to the corner table and sat down across from Walter without being invited. He looked up from the newspaper he was reading. His hands were around his coffee cup, trembling slightly. "Clara," he said. "Walter Thompson," I said. He set the newspaper down, folded it carefully along the original crease, set it to the side. "I was wondering when Dorothy would find the article," he said. "It wasn't Dorothy. It was Darnell. He called me last night." Walter nodded slowly. "Raymond reached out to him yesterday afternoon." "I know." I looked at the man across from me, the worn cardigan, the careful quarters, the two clear gray eyes. "I need you to tell me the truth, from the beginning." Walter was quiet for a moment. Outside, Summer Avenue was beginning its morning business. Delivery trucks, early commuters, the particular gray light of Memphis in March. "My name really is Walter," he said. "Walter Eugene Thompson, 76 years old. Eleanor was my wife for 44 years. She died 18 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months from diagnosis to end." A pause. "My children, I have a son and a daughter, came to the hospital during the last week. They were more concerned with the estate than with their mother." "You told me some of this before." "I told you the true parts," he said. I left out context. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "I built Thompson Capital from nothing. Started in 1972 with a small commercial property loan and 40 years of decisions that were sometimes right and sometimes badly wrong. By the time Eleanor got sick, I had more money than I knew how to account for, and children who had grown up around that money and developed a particular relationship to it. They wanted the inheritance. They wanted certainty, he said. They wanted to know the exact number and the exact timeline, and whether I had updated my will to reflect their preferences. Eleanor was still alive. I was still grieving in advance, and my children were asking about the estate. He looked at me directly. After Eleanor died, I decided I needed to understand something. I had spent 50 years being Walter Thompson of Thompson Capital. I had no idea what kind of person I was when I was just Walter. A man in a cardigan. A man with a coin purse. You wanted to know who would be kind to you when you had nothing. I wanted to know who I was when I had nothing, he corrected gently. The kindness was, I didn't expect the kindness. I expected to be invisible, which I mostly was. A brief pause. Until you, I looked at him for a long time. The phone, the platinum case. I kept one phone, he said. For Raymond, for emergencies. I left it in the inside pocket because I forgot about it one morning and then I realized it didn't matter. No one looks at a trembling old man in a cheap cardigan closely enough to notice what's in his inside pocket. The trembling, I sagely said. Something almost like a smile. Essential tremor. Real, I'm afraid. It comes and goes depending on stress and fatigue. When I'm focused on something, when something matters to me, it steadies. I thought about the moment he'd stood up in front of Darnell, the stillness of his hands at his sides. What did Raymond find? I asked. Walter reached into that inside pocket and removed a folded sheet of paper. He placed it on the table between us and smoothed it flat with one steady hand. Your son works for a firm called Alderton and Pierce. Commercial litigation. I started. That's not... Darnell works for Henderson and Associates. He did. Henderson and Associates was acquired 14 months ago. Walter's finger moved down the page. Acquired by a holding company called Meridian Professional Services. Meridian is a subsidiary of Thompson Capital Group. The room tilted slightly. You own the firm where Darnell works. Controlling interest. Yes. And the house. The mortgage on the property at 4412 Prescott Street was sold by the original lender to a mortgage servicing company called Cornerstone Residential 18 months ago. He looked at me. Cornerstone is a Thompson Capital company. I put my hand flat on the table. And the trust, I said. The documents Darnell used. The trust was registered through a bank called First Meridian Trust and Savings. He waited. Thompson Capital, I said. A subsidiary, yes. I sat with this for a moment. The geometry of it. The way the walls had been Walter's walls all along without anyone knowing. Not Darnell, not me, not anyone who had been inside them. Walter, this is enormous. It's a large organization, he agreed. I haven't been active in day-to-day operations for 18 months. Raymond runs things, but the ownership hasn't changed. What are you going to do with it? He looked at me with those gray eyes, clear and level and entirely without cruelty, which was what surprised me most. That depends on you, he said. I can do this one of two ways, Walter said. He poured more coffee from the pot I'd brought to his table. His hands were steady this morning. Raymond can call Darnell's managing partner this afternoon and request his immediate termination, citing a clause in the acquisition agreement that allows Thompson Capital to restructure personnel. Simultaneously, Cornerstone can initiate a mortgage review that will identify several technical irregularities in the documentation Darnell filed when he refinanced your house after the trust transfer. Those irregularities would require immediate remediation, meaning the loan would be called, effectively in full within 30 days. I listened. His car loans are held through a financing company that Thompson Capital acquired last year. Those can be restructured under terms that would make the payments untenable on a reduced income. You could take everything from him, I said. In approximately 72 hours, yes. I looked at the table, at my hands on the table, the hands that had carried plates and written lesson plans and held Harold's hand in a hospital and counted out $61 in a thin-walled apartment on Lamar Avenue. What's the second way? I asked. Raymond presents Darnell with a choice. Return every dollar, Clara, with interest calculated from the date of transfer, and sign documents legally restoring your property to your sole name. In exchange, nothing at Thompson Capital changes. His job is untouched. His mortgage terms remain as they are. His financing stays in place. And if he refuses? Then we proceed with the first option. And my case with Memphis Elder Justice Alliance continues regardless, Walter said. Raymond will provide supporting documentation that strengthens your position considerably. The legal case can proceed in parallel. I looked at him. Why? I said. Not why are you doing this? I thought I understood that, or was beginning to. What I meant was the deeper why, the one underneath. He understood. Because Eleanor deserved someone who would have done this for her, he said quietly, and because you reminded me that the world still has people in it who give away their lunch. The morning rush was starting. I could hear Dorothy handling the door, the sound of booths filling, the coffee machine cycling. I don't want him destroyed, I said. He's still my son. I know. I want him to understand what he did, really understand it. Not because he got caught, because he actually sees it. That, Walter said carefully, is harder to guarantee, but it's worth attempting. The second option, I said. Give him the choice. Walter nodded once. He picked up his phone. He pressed Raymond's number. I stood up and went back to work. Darnell came in on a Saturday. He was alone. No Brianna. He looked like he had not slept well in several days. Unshaven, in jeans and a fleece pullover I recognized from 10 years ago. A softness around his edges that the suit usually covered. He stood at the door for a moment, looking at the room, and when he found Walter at the corner table, he walked over without looking for me first. I watched from the coffee station. Walter gestured to the seat across from him. Darnell sat. I could not hear everything. The Saturday morning crowd was bigger than weekdays, but I could see. And what I saw was this. Walter talked for a long time while Darnell sat very still. Walter's voice was low and even, and his hands were wrapped around his coffee cup. He was not performing anything. He was not threatening or posturing. He was simply saying true things in a quiet voice to a man who had perhaps not had enough true things said to him directly. At some point, Darnell looked down at the table. At some point, he looked up and found me across the room, and the look on his face was something I had not seen there since he was very small, since the baseball and the broken window and the long walk home with Harold. The look of a person who has been fully seen and cannot locate the defense for it. Walter placed a single folded document on the table, a pen beside it. Darnell looked at it for a long time, then he looked up at me again. Not at Walter, at me. And what was in his face then? I will not try to name because I am not sure I have a word for it. It was not simple. It was not one thing. It was the complicated and ongoing work of a person beginning to reckon with themselves, and that kind of reckoning doesn't have a clean expression. "Mama," he said, loud enough for me to hear it across the room. His voice broke on the second syllable. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mama." I walked over to the table. I sat down beside Walter, across from my son. The three of us in the corner booth of Rosie's Diner on a Saturday morning, with the smell of coffee and bacon and the particular light of Memphis in March coming through the window. I looked at Darnell for a long time. "I know you are," I said finally. "The question is what you're going to do about it." He picked up the pen. His hand was shaking, really shaking, not a performance, not a central tremor, the shaking of a man confronting the distance between who he is and who he meant to be. He signed his name. 6 months is not a long time. It is long enough for a property transfer to be legally completed and recorded. Long enough for $162,000 to be returned to the account from which it was taken, plus interest, which came to $14,300 and some dollars that I did not expect and sat with for a long time before deciding what to do with. Long enough for a woman to move back into her house on Prescott Street, stand in her own kitchen on the first morning, make coffee in her own pot, and look out the kitchen window at the dry stalks of last year's sunflowers, and think, I'm going to need seeds in the spring. Long enough for some things to begin healing and others to become clear about their nature. Darnell and I had lunch together for the first time in November. A Tuesday, at a restaurant he chose. Neutral ground, not Rosie's, not his home or mine. He had been in therapy since September. He talked about it directly, without defensiveness, which was new. He talked about the entitlement he'd grown up around money's absence and then presence, the way he'd constructed a story about what he was owed. He didn't ask me to forgive him on a timeline. That was new too. I listened. I told him some things I had needed to say. We ate our food and we were careful with each other, the way you are careful with something that is still fragile and that you want very much not to break again. Isaiah asks about you every day, he said at the end. I know, I said. I got his letters. Darnell looked up. He's been writing me, I said, every week, since September. Dorothy helped him find my address. Something moved through my son's face. He never told me. He's 8, I said. He was taking care of his grandmother the best way he knew how. 2 weeks later, Darnell brought Isaiah to Prescott Street on a Wednesday afternoon. The boy came through the door and looked around the house like someone checking that everything was still where he'd left it. Then he found me and crossed the room without running, with a kind of contained urgency like he was trying to be grown up about it, and put his arms around me and held on. I held on back. After a while he pulled away and looked up at me very seriously. "Grandma Clara," he said, "can we read the book?" "Go get it off the shelf," I said. "You know where it is." He went and got it. He climbed into my lap, still too big, still unconcerned. He opened the front cover and studied his tally marks. Then he got out a pencil and made a new one. Simone called in October. She cried for a long time before she said anything coherent, and when she did, what she said was, "I knew it was wrong." I told myself a story about why it wasn't, and I knew the whole time. That, I will say for my daughter. She didn't try to construct a justification. She handed me the truth without wrapping it. I did not tell her she was forgiven. I told her I needed time. I told her the door wasn't closed, but I needed to decide for myself when and how far to open it. She said she understood. I think she did. The relationship with Simone is still a work in progress. Some distances don't close in 6 months. Some damage needs longer to show its true shape before you can know how to address it. I am not in a hurry. I have learned, among other things, that patience is not the same as surrender. Walter still comes to Rosie's 3 mornings a week. He still sits at the corner table. He still orders coffee and toast, though now he orders the full breakfast sometimes, and he tips 50%, and Dorothy treats him exactly the same as she always has, which he once told me was one of his favorite things about coming in. He told Dorothy who he was in October. She looked at him for a moment and then said, "Honey, I knew something was off about those quarters. Nobody who tips like you do counts quarters like that." He has introduced me to Raymond, who is a careful, precise man in his early 60s who clearly regards Walter with the particular loyalty of someone who has been trusted for a very long time. Raymond helped me understand the full legal dimensions of what Darnell had done, what had been recovered, and what protections were now in place. He did this without condescension, without making me feel like I should have known better, and without billing me a single dollar. Walter and I have dinner together on Friday evenings, sometimes at his house, a gracious Victorian on a quiet street that is nothing like what you would imagine for a man of his particular wealth, which is entirely intentional. Sometimes at a restaurant we found that neither of us had been to before, because Walter says one of the privileges of this stage of life is that there is still so much left to discover if you stay curious. We talk about Harold and Eleanor. We talk about the mistakes we made as parents and the ones we couldn't have prevented and the difference between the two. We talk about what it means to build a life and what it means to lose one, and what, after all of that, you find you are still carrying. I am not going to describe what we are to each other in a term, because I have found that terms often diminish what they're trying to define. What I will say is this: there is a person in my life who knows the true shape of what I've been through and does not flinch from it, and who has a life of his own that I do not flinch from either, and who on Friday evenings makes me laugh at least once in a way I did not expect. And that is something I had not thought to hope for again. That is something I am grateful for in a way that is too quiet and too deep for a simple word. I am talking to you directly now. No more story, just me. I don't know who you are or where you're watching from, but I know something about you because I know something about who watches stories like this one. Maybe you're in a comfortable place and this was just a story that moved you. That's good. That's enough. Or maybe, and I think maybe this is true for more of you than will say so in the comments, maybe you're watching this at a time when you are not in a comfortable place. Maybe you are in a season that has taken more from you than you thought you had to lose. Maybe the people you gave the best decades of your life to have made choices that you are still trying to understand. Maybe you are 65 or 70 and you are starting over in a way you never planned. And some days that starting over feels like dignity, and some days it just feels like exhaustion. I hear you. I am not going to tell you that everything works out, because I don't know your story, and I won't insult you by pretending I do. What I will tell you is what I know from mine. I know that the same hands that signed those papers, The hands that trusted the wrong person at the wrong moment, that were tired and grieving and not careful enough. Those same hands made Walter a peanut butter sandwich on a Tuesday when they didn't have much to give. And I know that the second set of hands matters more than the first. I know that kindness given when you have very little is not weakness. It is the truest expression of character. And character, it turns out, is what people remember. Character is what comes back to you. Not always, not on any schedule you can predict, but it comes back. I know that starting over at 68 is not the same as starting from zero. You are starting over with everything you learned, everything you survived, every year of knowing yourself more clearly. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite a lot. And I know this. The people who took from me did not take my ability to give. They tried. They came close. But they did not get there. And that one preserved thing, turned out to be the thing that changed everything. I am Clara Johnson. I am 68 years old. I taught third grade for 35 years, and I buried a good man, and I lost my home, and I found it again, and I am standing in my own kitchen this morning looking out at the place where the sunflowers will come back in June. I have seeds on the windowsill. I am not waiting for spring. I am ready for it. They can take your house. They can empty your accounts. They can stand in front of strangers and make you feel like nothing. But they cannot take who you are, unless you hand it to them. And I decided, on a Tuesday night in January, in a thin-walled apartment with $61 in my account and a grandchild's text message on my phone, that I was done handing things away.